is. It looks like it to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So welcome, everybody. I will call to order the Nashville MTA Board meeting, and I'll do a roll call. Walter Searcy.
I'm here.
Jessica Dalton.
Present.
Janet Miller.
Present.
Gil Carr-Williams, present, and Mary Griffin is excused today. First on our agenda is second on our agenda is the approval of the April 28th meeting minutes.
Move the approval of the minutes.
Second.
There's a motion and second. Is there any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Vote.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We have minutes. Next on our agenda are public comments, and I have one request from Darius Knight. And as we recall, we have 3 minutes for public comments. Mr. Knight.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My comments this month are going to be about the failure of your staff responding to issues that were valid. And literally at this point, I have been asking this staff since 2015 to fix a lot of its issues with its buses. Unfortunately, there's been some things that have happened in the past few years. And literally last year, I pretty much begged and pleaded, sent multiple emails. I asked that those emails be sent to you all as the board. I contacted the mayor's office. The mayor's office basically told me that I should send my resume over to them to be looked at so that the mayor could choose his option to place me on the board. Because of the simple fact that I've been reporting to them multiple issues over a decade, and yet they have no power. They tell me to come speak to you all because you are the power of We Go, because you're the MTA board. So I explained to them, I come to nearly every single meeting, and I express this, and I ask staff to send certain things to you all, and it does not get sent. So I now understand why the other customers do not come to this board meeting to give any public comments. Because why? They feel like they're not being heard. Had you all noticed a few years ago, there were more people, it wasn't just me. Now you only see me. I wonder why. So I will say this to you all. I have brought valid issues to not only the mayor's office, the council, the FTA, the state, but I addressed them initially with this staff to keep from going to the avenues I've had to go. You have bus operators who are literally veterans who are nearly about to walk off the job because nobody seems to hear them or understands their plight. So I've brought some information that I want you all to look at, but this is only a small piece. But I do have another form that I would like you all to see at the end of this board meeting.
You have 1 minute remaining. Okay. Are there any other public comments? I assume that concludes your comments because you had 10 more seconds go, but you're good. Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Any other public comments? Hearing no other public comments, that closes our public comment section of our agenda. At this point, I will turn this over to Mr. Searcy.
We will quickly pass the ball to Mr. Oliphant.
Wow.
There we go.
That was fast.
We're all about that today.
That's right. Okay, on pages 7, 8, and 9, you have the financials through March, so we've made it through the first 3 quarters of our fiscal year. And on page 8, I did give a narrative just to give you a brief oversight on one item, and that is on the non-transportation revenues appearing to be higher, which they were. We're glad that Premier has agreed to go up to 75% of gross revenues. As you know, we're in an abatement agreement for 50%, but they have gone ahead and moved to 75%. And Rita and I are still currently working with them on a new amendment to the contract for the rest of this year and next year. So that will be coming. I do want to highlight again, just as a reminder, on the contract revenues, you see those are unfavorable up at the top on page 8. And again, that is due to the reduced services that we were running through the first quarter of the year. And also the bigger portion that you're going to see hitting for the next 3 months is the assumption was that the WEGO, the fare collection system, would be fully operational on the train, which it is, but MTA has chosen to not start charging them for back office charges because the volume is not that great until July 1. So that will not be collected in revenues this year, but we're not also expending it as well. So other than that, in the coming months, as we head into the last quarter, in terms of labor and fringes, as you know, as always, I say medical claims and workers' comp always tend to come rear their ugly head as we move through the year. I've been trying to keep up with that, but you can see that the labor and fringes was basically right on budget for the month, but still negative for the year. That is not an indication. It's just that the reserves have to be adjusted as we move toward the end of the year. So that will be an ever-changing number as we move toward June 30. On page 9, we have the balance sheet. And again, nothing to highlight there other than the aging at the bottom of the page. And to disclose that RTA did owe $252,000 for services rendered to them for the Southeast Corridor. And we owed them about $24,000 for collection of revenues and revenue sharing. So unless there's any questions, that concludes my report. Yes, ma'am.
To this. Talk a little bit about the federal, state, and local revenue with the $4,335,000 and the $512,000. Is that just?
I love it because I get to say it, which I try to avoid at all times, but it's a
timing
issue.
It's a timing issue, yes.
In that we had not fully drawn, we had assumed in the budget that we would have fully drawn the Metro money, but we did not. Because it's because we were able to take advantage, if you notice, the $14 million down in the capital revenue section, we were able to pull that earlier than normal because, as you know, we're using American Rescue Plan as opposed to Federal 5307, and that's available to us right now, whereas the 5307 is usually not, which is why we have our line of credit in case we needed it. But so we were able to draw on that early and didn't need all the Metro money for that month.
Okay, great, thank you.
We have now drawn all of the Metro money, though. So.
Okay, great, thank you very much.
Good question.
Absolutamente. Any other questions for the guru of cash? All right. Andy, you're next.
All right, thank you. If you open your packets to page 10 for the monthly operating statistics for March. As always, we provide a narrative to kind of quickly give you a summary of what transpired. A couple notes I'll bring to your attention are, again, ridership continues to increase. And we actually had our highest month of ridership since pre-pandemic, almost hitting 75% of pre-pandemic numbers, which is great. And I also, as you guys know, in April, we went through our service changes and we continue to see those ridership numbers to continue to increase there as well. So ridership is continuing to increase in return, so that's good. Under our service quality metrics, these look good for this month. I'd like to typically look over our preventable accidents to see if there was anything major or anything worth noting. Fortunately, these were all not major accidents. These operators were retrained and minor issues, mirror taps and whatnot. So I usually like to make sure I make a note of that. The other thing I want to make mention of is our bus trip completion. Notice that it's around 99% to 100% every month. In April, we're going to see a little bit of a dip, but still over the 99% due to those service changes, operators learning the routes, also with the influx of routes and the changes that we made. We're looking at our manpower and vehicle availability and whatnot, but we'll still see a good bus trip completion for that, but we'll be keeping an eye on that as we continue to go forward. Other than that, those are the kind of notes I wanted to make mention. That'll conclude my report unless there are any questions.
I do have one question. How many new operators did we get maybe over the last couple months?
Over the last couple months, so ever since we introduced the permit training class, we've hired about 70 to 75, I think. Kim Tucker would probably be able to answer that better than I can, but the last time I looked, it was around 70, in the 70s range is how many new operators we've taken in since around November.
And you're pleased with that?
I'm
Still work to go, I
Yeah, there's a lot
understand.
more work to go. I'm happy, I will say, with introducing that permit training class, if we didn't have that, we would be hurting a lot more than we are today. But I think with the training program that we've implemented, the recruiting efforts that we have, we're heading in the right direction. But there's still a lot of work ahead of us.
What's the net number? So we picked up 75, how many went out the back door?
In terms of, right now, we're about 379 operators from our last manpower report. When it comes to those new operators coming through the door, I think there's about, our retention's about 32% loss rate. So that's with resignations, retirements, and whatnot, which is a lot better for our when the new folks come through. We're seeing a better retention rate with the non-CDL holders, the permit training classes coming through. So the ones that are kind of coming in brand spanking new, haven't driven a bus before, those are the ones that are kind of coming through the door and being like, okay, this is somewhere I want to stay, this is something I'm interested in. Again, it's a new program, so I'm sure, we're still ironing some things out. There are some folks that are coming through the door and being like, this isn't for me, and kind of walking out. So, but overall, I think it's a program that's been working, and it's helping our efforts. So,
What's the flip point? That is, after we train them and they get their CDL, what's the danger point at which they go work elsewhere with that license?
So the danger point, is that what you said?
Yes.
I would say, so right now we're looking at kind of what are some of our retention efforts when it comes to when we get people through the door, how do we keep them here? And normally what I would say is that first year is it's all hands on deck. If we can get people to stay for that first year and get through, hey, this is new, this is challenging, get through those humps, then we kind of see that those retention efforts kind of improve over that first year. So that first year, it's really, through the 9 weeks of training, how often are we touching base with them after that? And so we're working on a program to kind of do lunch and learns. We're working on shadow programs and kind of just building those career ladders to, we have a lot of opportunities, and you've seen in some of our staff where they started out as operators, moved into supervision, moved into manager roles, and which is great. And we want to be able to continue promoting those type of those programs, even company-wide.
Probably be worthwhile for us, June might be a packed agenda with budget and capital plan, but maybe in July we can do another update on the staffing recruitment. Because then the other issue, in addition to the operators, which is what we tend to put a lot of focus on, is actually the technician area is another one of concern.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. With nothing further on that, Dan, you are in the shoe.
All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We've got the quarterly route performance indicator report for the period of January through March on pages 15 and 16 in your packet. And I did want to note before getting into the details of the report itself that we do have some changes to the report format this month. First, similar to a change we made a couple of months ago on the monthly dashboard, we've added a column for percentage of pre-pandemic ridership on a route by route level. So you can get an idea of where we're recovering more quickly across the network, and you can see the relative comparisons of the different routes. So that baseline that we took, measure that we took, was from the last calendar quarter, so October through December of 2019, kind of our last normal quarter before COVID. We've also removed routes that we had previously included on the report that were marked as not in service when those had been temporarily discontinued, but through better bus restructuring have been more permanently removed from the network. So those were like some of the commuter and express routes that haven't run for a couple of years now, just to clean up the report format. And then we've also removed the color codings, especially for the passengers per hour column. It was a little bit confusing, and also we were basing those highlights off of some older performance criteria related to productivity, and we're looking at recalibrating those based on what our overall system performance is currently. Any questions on that reformatting or any other suggestions before we move into the report?
Thank you for doing
Okay,
that.
all right, thank you. So I did want to highlight first, and it seems like I bring this route to the attention of the board every time I do this report, but the 55 continues to, that's Murfreesboro Pike, continues to really impress us in terms of its productivity, and it's also at the highest levels compared to pre-pandemic of any other route in the system, with the 23 Dickerson Road being a close second. And I did want to highlight the Murfreesboro corridor as well as one of the areas where we've actually had to be sure that we're consistently running 60-foot articulated buses on that alignment because of passenger volumes. And so that's just one reason why the order of the 60-foot buses that we'll be receiving later from New Flyer is really important to maintaining overall service accessibility. For the 23 Dickerson, we also added a significant amount of service where we were previously operating 20 to 25 minute frequency on that route, and now we're down to 12-minute frequency. Now that change didn't take effect with this quarter, but I just want to note it in terms of the year-over-year comparisons and how we're seeing ridership respond to that change. We also have steady ridership that we see on the route 8th Avenue South. And then overall, I wanted to note that the top 5 routes, which are the 23 Dickerson, 50 Charlotte, 52 Nolensville, 55 Murfreesboro, and 56 Gallatin, together, they actually comprise nearly 60% of our system ridership overall. So you see a lot of routes on this report, but if you really focus on that core high frequent transit network, that's where a majority of our passengers are riding. And so that's also where we're going to be focusing future initiatives for service reliability improvements. Not to say that we won't be doing anything at a more system-wide level on other routes, but we get the greatest bang for our buck there when we're looking at things like transit signal priority or other types of improvements that we can make internally or in partnership with TDOT and NDOT. Speaking of service reliability, I did want to note, as ridership has been increasing, we have continued to see a slow but steady decline in our on-time performance. It's actually still higher than it was before the pandemic, and we don't see any significant areas of concern. Generally, for an agency of our size, if you're performing in the mid 80s in terms of on-time performance, you're doing pretty well. So for us to be in the mid to upper 80s system-wide is still pretty encouraging. We do, however, look when we start to slip into the lower 80s and upper 70s for certain routes to see if there's things that we can do to improve. We've got one route right now in that category, the 25 Midtown connector, and we'll be looking at things that we can do to improve reliability in that particular corridor. But we also, even if a route isn't particularly struggling, we take time to do detailed schedule analyses at least annually on every route, and generally at every service change for our major frequent corridor routes. So that's my report for today, but I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Is there any route that you're particularly concerned about?
From a ridership perspective or service reliability or?
Ridership perspective.
I wouldn't say concerned about, but I do look at the routes that are still relatively low compared to what they were pre-pandemic. So for example, the Route 9, which actually serves this area, Metro Center, I'd be interested to look into a little bit more detail about why that route has been slower to recover. And there's others on the list as well, like the 4 Shelby in East Nashville. And I suspect it has more to do with you know, with what those more micro factors are that affect those individual routes in terms of how land use may have changed and commute patterns have changed on those particular corridors, or, you know, certain major employers that maybe have gone to more of a hybrid type work environment. But we need to dig into that in a little bit more detail to see if there's anything that we can be doing on our end to help encourage sort of readoption among customers, whether that be through the expansion of the WeGo Ride program or other actions.
You know, with the hybrid schedule that so many companies are going to, we may never get much higher than 75%. Just, you know, some people work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and some people work. It's going to be interesting to see how it comes back, just because the world changed, you know, so.
I mentioned this in prior months' meetings, but I'll repeat it again. Probably the two markets that we're most concerned about, one is what Janet's alluding to, which is what I'll call that kind of hardcore downtown commuter, office commuter, and the other is our Metro Nashville school kids. We're down significantly, even once schools return to in-person instruction. So that one will be interesting to see when we start the new school year. This was still kind of a crazy school year for a lot of folks, but it's one we're going to have to put some attention on coming back. And at least on this side, you know, the other one is on the lower ridership routes, like the connector network. Those fluctuations can, 5 people changing their patterns can have a real impact compared to the frequent service network, where those are much bigger numbers. But I would say the good news for the MTA board is when we look at these numbers at the RTA level, which is almost exclusively a downtown office commuter, it's still downright depressing. I think we're still below 40%.
Below 40%.
Pre-pandemic, yeah, including on the train.
I don't understand that.
People want to be alone, too, if they do come in. Thank you, Dan.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, Walter, I said thank you, Dan, like it was mine to do.
It's all right. It's all right. With that, we're going to ask Rita to lead us through the list of upcoming procurement projects.
We
Page
don't have-
17.
Sure. We don't have any changes from last month's report. So again, we just always ask the board if you'll stay mindful of the things that we have listed here. And if you know businesses or individuals who might be great for us to reach out to, we'd appreciate those contacts. And the staff continues to work diligently. Again, as you see on this list, there have already been some projects where small minority and women-owned businesses have been identified, and staff is diligently following up with those.
Thank you very much. Certainly encourage the board members to provide Rita and the gang a list of persons who they become aware of who fit that bill. All right, with that, Madam Chairperson, the committee not having any action items, we pass the gavel back to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Searcy, and just that quickly, I'll pass this over to Ms. Miller.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gale, Madam Chair. Okay, we've got 2 items on the New Initiatives and Community Engagement Committee, and we're starting with Ed to talk about the 23 operating budget update.
Thank
Take it
you,
away.
ma'am. On pages 19 through 24, we have a discussion item to go over. And basically, as you know, the mayor filed his proposed budget at the end of April. We were in there, thank goodness. And actually, he proposed everything that we asked for on our initial ask. How I want to handle this, I want to kind of cover this in 2 phases. In the middle of page 19 is really the second phase of what I want to talk about. I think it's kind of important to just, even though this is the next to last time you'll have to consider the budget this year. This will be your 4th time or 3rd time to talk about it. But the items in the middle are the things that will take up most of this conversation. But I thought it was important that we also talk a little historical and where the actual recommendation fits in with where we've been. So The actual recommendation was the $62.6 million. What did that include? That included a 10.7 million increase, which was made up of what we considered and estimated to be the inflationary impact on their subsidy for the inflation that we're seeing now. It also included the $4.3 million, which represents what we just implemented last month as far as new service. That's the entire cost, the annual cost for that service. And it also included $3.9 million for new service to be implemented in the phase 2 of Better Bus. So actually, if you'll flip over to page 20, the chart there kind of shows where we've been and where we are. We were, as you know, level for fiscal years 18 through 20. And we applied CPI just to give you some reference point to know what that would look like. And as you can see, the green bar on the far right-hand side, which represents the entire $62 million, that it's pretty much following along with CPI. And that, I will remind you, I have applied CPI at anywhere from 7.5% to 8.5%, which is what we're seeing. Fiscal year 21, actually, according to the government, ended up at 7.5%, but they expect it to be higher over the next 2 years. So from a historical perspective, that's what it includes. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it does mean that we have the approximately 35,000 hours of service that we just implemented in the spring. And then the $3.9 million at the bottom of page 20 and top of page 21, I won't go into detail because Steve has said them ad nauseum for you, but it's good to see what is included in the $3.9 million because it's important to know. Now, with the items that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, one of those being the workforce shortages, as you know, some of that's going to will cause us to have to backfill on the new services probably in the spring. And it gives us a little bit of time to reach that goal that you all were discussing with Andy just a few minutes ago. But from a historical perspective, that's what it looks like. And again, it does include 42,000 hours. So now you've seen where we are with Metro subsidy and how it trended. Now another area is how has our budget actually trended? And on pages 21 and the top of page 22, you see a graph on top of page 22 that basically shows you where our cost per hour has been, which is the blue bars, and then our budget line, which is the red line. The red line references the left-hand side numbers for the budget dollars, and then the cost per hour is on the right-hand side just for reference purposes. And you can see one of the main ways we measure is by cost per hour. We want to know that we're managing the monies that we've received and not gone above what CPI would be. And so far, we've done a pretty good job because you have to consider the service inputs, again, the inflation, the labor, all those things that are constantly changing. As you know, the CBA, we saw a bump up in the CBA for starting salaries and compression of the driver's wages to 3 years, which obviously puts a little bit more pressure on the cost per hour. You also have your normal overhead costs that will impact your cost per hour, as well as your non-service enhancements, i.e. shelter cleaning, things like that we want to keep on a top-notch basis with Trey's team to make sure we maintain our what we look like to the public. So now I want to kind of jump into part 2 of this. That's at the bottom of page 22, and we move into page 23. Probably the biggest thing that I've already mentioned is the fact that we are seeing inflation at levels we haven't seen in a long time. In particular, fuel prices. I know you all go to the pump, you see what's happening, and quite honestly, the numbers that we had assumed in this budget presentation to Metro, we're already exceeding those numbers in the current fuel prices. You know, we do have a fuel hedge that helps, but it just in general, overall, fuel prices are kind of unpredictable, but have a pretty significant impact. In the budget that we presented had a $3.6 million increase in fuel alone. So that is something that we're gonna have to talk about here in just a second. In the graph that you see on the top of page 23, basically we applied again the same CPI numbers that I was talking about to see how our cost per hour is compared, taking CPI from fiscal year 14, the budget from fiscal 14 and applying CPI. you see that we are lagging behind that. I can rest assure you that that will change when we hit the final fiscal year 23 numbers. We will see an increase. And for example, just to give you some perspective, our estimated was about $122 to $123 per hour on our cost per hour. If you apply an 8% number to that, you're already up to $133 to $134 an hour. So when we do get to the budget presentation next month, I just wanted you all to keep that in mind. So what is impacting that? It goes back to those service inputs, overhead, and service enhancements. It's the workforce shortage. Obviously, we will need to back end, as I've already mentioned, back end the new services more than likely. We're going to have to take into account the fuel price increases that we are seeing that are exceeding what we've already submitted to Metro. Just as an example, right now, if it stayed where it is right now, it's about another $750,000 for fuel alone, just because of where we are now. So we have some decisions that we're going to make when I bring the budget to you next month, and I'll talk about some of the areas that I'm going to consider, and obviously seek input from the board if you so choose. But I guess the only other thing, obviously parts expense, the supply chain issue is obviously a big impact on us. As you know, from a fixed asset standpoint, that's causing us problems, especially with the access vans. With having to operate older vehicles, we're going to have a lot more expense. Plus, we have to be able to find those parts on a timely basis to be able to repair those vans. So we are stocking up on the critical parts that we think are going to be needed to make sure we don't have that problem. The last thing we want to have happen is, hey, we need this part, oh, we aren't going to get it for another 2 weeks. Well, that's not acceptable. So we're trying to offset that by overstocking some of the items that we normally wouldn't. Now, one last thing, the federal relief dollars, the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan. As you know, we're using the American Rescue Plan right now to free up 5307 for capital projects this year and next year by using the ARP. So that's pretty much going to get used up through that process. And we still have CARES Act funding available to us, because one of the things that the board was considering, and obviously I was going to keep in the back pocket, was the $3.9 million. We didn't know if Metro was going to do that or not. So right now, through my forecasts, I still have $3.9 million left that we could apply. So what are the areas that I'm going to be presenting to the board? As far as the fact that I really do think we need to change the budget from what we submitted to Metro, we need to be realistic in what we're facing, and now we have more information now than we did 2 months ago. But there's several areas we can cover that. As you know, when we ask for new services, we ask for that at a fully allocated rate. The services aren't actually going to cost that. As far as the labor and the fuel and the maintenance of those vehicles isn't going to cover that fully allocated rate, because it includes overhead. So we have some cushion there with which to work with. Now, do we have other needs that we're going to have to fill? Yes, we're going to probably we might need another supervisor or two. We might need another maintenance supervisor. We certainly need more mechanics, right, Andy? But that's one area that we do have some cushion. Obviously, we have CARES that we could apply to it, but we have to be careful with that, because that, again, that's one-time funding. We need to be very deliberate about how we're using that funding, because it's going to go away, and we just want to make sure we have the right reserves in place, if you will, for that. Worst case scenario, we could defer some of the better bus improvements. We would apply it toward fuel or whatever that expense is, because it is part of the workforce shortage. We're obviously going to be spending more money trying to attract employees. We're going to come up with sign-on bonuses. That's one of the new craves right now as far as attracting people to positions. So we're going to see some increased expenses there as well. Now, I hope I have covered those already in the budget we've presented, but it's another unknown, if you will. So I've talked enough. I hope I've given you a pretty good indication of where we are and where we're headed and what to expect for the June presentation when we bring it to the board next month, but I would be glad to answer any questions or take any advice.
Questions for Ed?
When will our budget be presented to council? Do we have a date yet?
That was 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the budget's the budget. The mayor puts it in, the council could fiddle with it, may not, maybe not. But essentially, we're going to have to be on a moving train, making choices as the year goes by, is essentially, right?
Yeah, and I think the implication for what you'll see next month is we'll be conservative on the things that we have discretion over,
Right.
so we can address the volatility. So that probably means, to the probably the dismay of a lot of people in this room, we'll defer a lot of any potential position increases and other, what I'll call, like immediate initiatives, just to see how we deal with fuel prices, inflation. Some things are sort of locked in. I mean, we do have a locked-in wage rates through the collective bargaining agreement. So, you know, you're not going to be seeing the 8%. Not to go back to the chart that Ed alluded to on page 23, is I think this board and Ed's leadership on the finance side, that's what my target is, always to keep that purple bar underneath the red line. And obviously, at what Ed's alluding to is in FY23, you'll see that purple bar go up quite a bit, but you're also going to see the red line go up quite a bit.
Right.
So I would still expect us to be below the rate of inflation when all is said and done. But it's a lot, and it's in real time. And I know it's much against Ed's nature to say that, you know, we can't lock in a budget on July 1st and we just ride it out for the year. But I know you all have been involved in various businesses, whether it's the Alliance or it's your business, Janet, and we're all going to have to ride the wave for a bit.
And without stealing Steve's thunder in his CEO report, which I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about as far as talking to council, this is not a surprise to council. They're hearing exactly the same thing across all the other departments. It would literally shock me if there's any one department that anticipated the fuel costs to be what they're going to be, because it's for general services, for schools, it's a major impact on their budget as well. So one thing, the only person in this room that remembers this, and I'm looking at her, is that in 2008, we had a very similar, if you recall, we had a very huge spike in fuel prices. So one other, I won't call it an alternative, one other possibility is that because of that, Metro did an emergency appropriation for pretty much all the departments that had fuel costs. We received about $500,000 in an emergency appropriation that year just to cover, to make sure that the service stayed on the street, because we were literally not able to keep up with the fuel costs. So that's also another possibility. But this is known quantity, known quantity in that it's a problem, not necessarily known as to what the level of that problem will be, but
And how long this is.
and how long it will last.
Yeah, and whether it's a bubble. One advantage we have is we still do have cushion to address, so we're not looking at a situation where we'd have to be looking at fare increases or service reductions, because we do have that federal cushion. The issue is, you know, does this wave crest and fall back down quickly, or is it more elongated? And if it's more elongated, then we're going to have to look at other opportunities.
It's maddening. Other questions, comments? Well, it's
So I will see you next month with a budget.
great. I'm sure it will change 4 times between now and then. so.
Probably.
All right, great. Thank you, Ed, and thanks for all of your hard work and the whole team. This is not a simple budget to put together, so. Okay, our other item is discussion with Trey on the Nestor Modernization Study update. So Trey?
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. As you'll recall, about a year ago, I'm gonna mirror Ed and say that what we thought we knew a year ago, we didn't quite know everything. So I'm gonna continue that theme a little bit. So about a year ago, we came to the board with HDR and initiated a study to be able to look at the Nestor property and look at long-term improvements on the property and what our options are as far as the modernization of that facility. And we've done a lot of that work, and I'll provide an update today, but then also, like I said, there've been a couple things that have changed directions in that period of time. So just a little bit of background on the property and how we use it. It's mission critical to everything that we do is the Nestor property. Since fall of 2019, when we had our service cuts, we have run all of our operations and maintenance on a day-to-day basis out of there. We do have a small body shop doing some heavy body repair work at Myatt, but besides that, everything's being dispatched on a daily basis out of the Nestor property. So we've got about 15 and a half acres. Our covered area is about 222,000 square feet, and we're running about 300 vehicles of varying sizes out of there on a daily basis. All told, that accounts for about 550 of our staff members as well. I'm going to break down some of our issues and considerations in 4 main buckets today. First and foremost, let's just talk a little bit about what the site could do better for our day-to-day operations as they currently exist. What are those deficiencies? And primarily, that focuses on circulation of the facility. The facility currently abuts the Cumberland River, so we don't have an ability to circumnavigate the site. And a lot of that internal circulation, which takes place on a daily basis with our service cycle, takes place through the facility. So you see the little blue arrows. We have the main bus lot at 9 and our main paratransit fleet lot at 10. And on a daily basis, we come all the way out to 7 in our fuel lane, drive through the building by 5, past the number 4, circulate through the building, and pop back out right by the river on 10. That takes place with every vehicle, every day, sometimes multiple times. And what that does is it has other implications on how we move the fleet around. And so we end up with a lot of covered space inside the building, but not necessarily efficiently utilized space. It's made to promote that circulation internally. And then we also have some backing required. We have service lanes tucked into, primarily for non-revenue vehicles and our paratransit access fleet, where we back in and back out. And so there's some certain conflict points within the building as well. So that's our first bucket that we talk about. Second, we got this information from HDR when they looked at our site and how we have everything laid out. Better Bus calls for about a 40 bus expansion to our existing fleet, 40 vehicle total expansion. Taking what we have present day on site and adding that 40 to it really does bust the equation for the Nestor property without looking at vertical expansion or something very, very dramatic on the property. Third, we have the ever-present threat of the Cumberland River. So we know it's there. We know it can be cranky at times. And so that is a risk that we need to be able to filter our other decisions through. And then fourth, looking ahead and into the future, and this will be something we bring up next month in the capital plan as we look at a zero emissions fleet plan for the agency and considering what those impacts would be to our existing fleet and our operations and maintenance. And we know that will have an impact on the Nestor facility because currently we're not generating power for a hydrogen plant, for instance, or we don't have the storage facility, or for a compressed natural gas facility, we don't have that refueling station. So we know that's going to be another bite out of the apple that we're asking for the property as we move forward with that. Just to remind everyone of what the Cumberland River is capable of when we look at a flood risk and everything on the property. This was 2010. This is obviously the worst that we've encountered on the property, but I will note that we have evacuated twice in the last 4 years on weekends, fortunately, when the river has crested about to parking lot elevation for us. So it is something to consider when we start looking at risk on the property and how we juggle what we invest. And what that really impacts is our resiliency. So if, say, we were to look at something in that zero emissions fleet plan that makes that property even more mission critical for that source, we can find gas stations anywhere, even if it's expensive. But if something is located at that facility, we need to have the redundancy and resiliency to be able to keep our service moving. Looking at other considerations on the property, easements within the floodway and other utilities. So if we were to modernize the Nestor facility, the red and green bands up at the top of the screen would be areas that essentially we would try to avoid within construction. Currently, our building encroaches within this area, so we would look to pull it back for general guidance from the Army Corps on what we can and can't do up against the Cumberland. We do have the ability to reallocate our space right now. So essentially, the building footprint that you see and the way that it is above the 100-year floodplain, we could essentially reallocate that space on the site without any sort of major remediation efforts. We do have water infrastructure across the site that can be built over, but it's something to consider. And then on the very far right, the orange bar is a colonial gas line that runs underneath the property that essentially we can't build over because they need to maintain access to that at all times. Okay, now we're going to shift over to things, we've been talking about things within our control and problems that we can solve on the property that we know about. There are things that are just pure unknowns at this point on what happens with the nature of the Nestor property and the area around it. First, and focusing on the left, is just general development trends in and around the area. The image I'm showing on the screen is the property adjacent to us. On the property, there is an option for purchase of that property that would essentially upzone that area, should it go through with Metro Planning. And Metro Planning is working with that developer on a study area for the whole Driftwood Avenue area on if it can support, more dense high-rise development that we see as we trend closer to town from the Nestor property. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is in a lot of the study work that's coming out that we're a part of as a stakeholder on the East Bank. There's a desire for an additional bridge connecting across the river on the southern edge. And in the RAISE grant application that was put in by Metro last month, this shows the Blue Bridge concept actually bisecting the Nestor property. So the consideration for that location could take place in and around our facility.
Steve, is that the bridge route that the mayor supports? There were 3, I think.
Yeah, well, they're all concepts at this level. So Trey alluded to the RAISE grant that Metro filed, and that would initiate a design and the environmental, there'd be a full environmental impact statement. So there would be all sorts of assessments, including the impact on our property. So right now, everything's conceptual. I think everybody pretty much agrees that with the growth and what they're looking at on the East Bank, that an additional river crossing is necessary. I wouldn't say that anybody's landed on a specific, so if you want to refer to this as a straw man, that's probably not a bad way to look at it.
Okay. I have a question. Is the option to buy Metro's option? Is that what you were talking about?
The adjacent property is not.
Whose option is it to buy?
It's a development group that's.
But it's not MTA's or governmental.
Right.
It's just another option by someone else. Is that what you meant?
It's so across the street, across Driftwood Street from us is a steel fabricator. They're leasing that property.
Okay.
So the owner is looking to potentially sell, and the option on it is the folks who are looking at the option are interested. Folks looked at what's now going on with the Oracle site and the East Bank and a kind of a complete repurposing of a warehouse industrial area, and saying, gee, if you want major development in a downtown core around Nashville, we're running out of those locations. So riverfront, waterfront's popular, so where's some good waterfront property? And if you look at that area, the land that Trey has on the left-hand side, so that industrial parcel, our property at 15 some acres, and then the next one downriver, which is about 30 acres, all of a sudden you have a pretty sizable section. So
and they're going to go for a lot of money. So, there could be a lot of money that would help with the relocation if we got to that point, right? And building a state-of-the-art facility.
And one of the conditions that Metro Planning was looking at with any potential development is really an area-wide study. So what are the implications? What are the implications for transportation? What are the implications for stormwater and flood control? What are the implications for industrial relocation? All of those issues. So I think what Trey's kind of concluding with is between the potential river crossing and the potential upzoning, these are not questions that are going to be answered quickly. So what we're kind of moving toward is things that are a little bit beyond our control. We'll obviously have input in, and there'll be conversation about, but it would really be tough for me to come to you and say, gee, we ought to put $100 million into this building at this moment. So that's not where this is leading, by the way.
I didn't think so.
That's right.
He didn't give us the upsides of the facilities. He only gave us the downsides of the
Right.
facilities.
So where Trey was starting out with was when we brought HDR on board, it's okay, this is really a strategic location and there's things we need to do. We want to look at potentially converting to zero emission. We know we've got to grow the fleet. What might we be able to do? And I think where HDR was landing is a lot of the stuff you have to do is so big and so comprehensive, we're now kind of coming back to, we probably have to wait for some evolution on this discussion before we start moving in that direction. But that kind of takes us back to the next phase
That's right.
of this presentation.
So with all that in mind.
That doesn't mean we can just leave it alone. So we're kind of leading to that. We can't just say, no, we're just going to leave it the way it is for whatever period of time.
That's exactly right. And we'll continue this discussion next month with our capital plan as well. But there are things that need to take place to continue our daily operations at the facility. They aren't the $100 million investments, but they are things that need to take place that can free up some space and make our use of the property a little safer and a little more efficient. We're working through the sinkhole repair. We've gotten the first phase of that effort complete in the demolition of the old wash house, and the other two pieces will be coming out to bid later this year. There is some riverbank stabilization, just keep going down the list, and eventually repaving the employee parking lot. And essentially all this has to do with getting stuff that takes up space on the lot right now that's dead space, moving it out and allowing us to utilize space that currently is spoken for with some of these deficiencies. And then some improvements to service lanes and just general HVAC repairs. So when we talk about these things, we often get the question, so what about the Myatt facility and considering it for operations and maintenance? And what would that look like? And the main concern there is it's not a central location for running everything. So you would have additional deadhead trips and mileage and fuel costs. We did look at that number, probably would take just moving everything 100% to the facility, and that operations cost starts out kind of in the $7 million range, but as Ed told, we're kind of riding a wave right now. And as we add service and service becomes more expensive, you're multiplying on top of that. Plus you're less reliable in that you always got that 12-mile trip, right? So you're stuck to whatever the variability is in that 12 miles before you get started. So looking ahead, and just some general considerations for things, as Steve said, it may be a while before we can have anything decisively, but some desired outcomes to consider as we look through everything that could take place on property. First and foremost, meet the site requirements, for the Nestor property and address the existing deficiencies. So if we're doing something in Nestor long-term, let's take care of the items that are sort of the daily headache items. Second, house the full Better Bus fleet and associated staff. Allow for potential fuel conversion to zero emissions fleet. So as that plan kicks off in the next year and comes to fruition, whatever the markers are there that we can deliver on those, be able to minimize unproductive trips in time. And then the fifth piece is that system resilience. So as events happen, things happen, be able to toggle between sites to be able to make our service reliable in the event that something unforeseen happens. And generally we can kind of plan that something unforeseen will happen that we need to be able to have a backup plan for. So I'll stop there and take any other questions that we have.
You don't have a recent appraisal on the property, do you?
Not on the Nestor property itself.
Be kind of interesting.
Yeah, we do know, not offhand, but we get information on what the valuation was for the purchase across the street, and that's probably not far off.
I can probably find that
And we're
out.
about 1.5 times the size of that property, so.
Yeah, but it would be significant. And when Trey talks about the resilience, it's the issue of, well, yeah, you can gain efficiencies by consolidating sites, but then you lose the redundancy. And I mean, guys, I see Gail nodding, you're probably remembering back as Ed would to the scrambling that had to occur when you essentially lost the entire operation. And, beg, borrow, and stealing locations from the school district.
Scramble is a nice word.
And, where at the very least, in those, Trey alluded to the fact we actually had to evacuate Nestor a couple times in the past few years. Ultimately, it didn't flood, but it came darn close. First of all, being on the weekend helped because it's a lower service requirement, but there is a certain safety net in knowing if we can get a bunch of people to drive a bunch of buses up the highway to Myatt, at least it's there. And we can operate, even if it's not optimal, we can operate on a short-term basis.
Questions, comments?
Nestor Street always has something to it. It's an interesting property.
It is. I mean, it's kind of a Rubik's Cube, right? But have you all ever, like, just scouted around to see if, I mean, it's not easy to find something
And
industrial that close.
I think you know this better than
Well,
we do.
my little wheels are turning. I have a couple of ideas.
Like
so,
you're asking us?
Yeah. All right, let me think.
But coming to that, yeah, we have, and there are sites of it. We've sort of looked to try to say to folks, and would not be a surprise to you, we get folks call us occasionally, hey, would you be interested in selling? And what I basically say is, find us 20 acres inside the 440 loop zoned appropriately, give us 5 years and $100 million, and we're interested.
You don't hear back from them, do you, Steve?
No, actually, there's a
Okay.
couple, it's getting, and that's where frankly, we had to start to decide, this might be something.
But the thing about it is, you can't sell it because you don't know where that road's going. If that road goes
Right.
right down the middle of the property, so.
Yeah, that's definitely an unknown. And the area-wide study, it's not a slam dunk that Metro would decide to upzone it. One of the things in talking to folks in the planning department is that, if we become a city that is just, commercial and condos, and there's not that mixed use of industrial and what have you, then we have some other issues. So it's a number of unknowns. Now, the interesting thing in working with HDR, because they've done bus facilities around the country, and, in places like Los Angeles and Chicago, where property is every bit as valuable as it is here, they've come up with some pretty creative solutions. I mean, they built a bus garage for LA that handles about twice the fleet on half the lot. And to Trey's point, how do you do that? Well, you do it by going up.
Go up.
Which is what we
And
did
that's
with
not
Music
cheap.
City Central.
We can get above the floodplain with our operation, but there's obviously significant expense to that.
Okay, interesting. Any other?
Stay tuned. I think
It'd be
it's
interesting to
amazing.
see how much our
Stay tuned is
hubs,
the
it'd be interesting to see how our hubs over the years sort of help to reduce some of that possibly.
Yeah.
Well, that was really interesting, Trey. You weren't helpful at all, but it was very interesting.
I embrace that I can't be helpful, it's super helpful.
I
on
said
this
he's not allowed to come
log.
back until he has actual answers.
Come back with
instead
a
of
solution, yeah, so.
To your
great.
point, just about on property, we did have just general look at greenfield sites and kind of one being, if you need one property that you can ask less of Nestor and do something. So it's like 15 acres to what Steve's saying. And then if you wanted just the idealized, flat farmland that's adjacent to downtown, it's
Yeah.
about 30 acres for
Okay,
everything.
good to know. Okay, great. If there are no more questions, then I'll hand it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Oh, well, thank you, Ms. Miller. You and Mr. Cersey were busy today. Thank you very much. Steve, I'll turn it over to you for your report.
I don't have too terribly much. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody, staff and board, who participated in our governance workshop last week. Walter, you were definitely missed and talked about, as were Trey and Felix, who were down for the count on that. But I think the feedback I've gotten from both members and staff was it was time well spent. We got a lot of ideas generated. Monica was just showing me the sheets that she's wrapping up, and working with Doug Eady, our governance counsel. We should have some recommendations and report back within the next month to month and a half. Second thing I would have to report with respect to the North Nashville Transit Center, construction bid documents are going to be released next week, so the clock will be starting on that. And I'm very proud of our development and procurement teams for the outreach they've done in the contractor community, so we do expect to see significant interest. But having said that, talking to many of my peers in the industry, talking to other public sector agencies like TDOT, the airport, about what they're seeing, we can expect to see. Ed's theme of volatility is certainly going to continue into our capital program. So we expect to get bids, and then we expect to scramble to figure out how to pay for bids. But as we've workshopped over the past few meetings, we will definitely be advancing that project. We're also working with Metro Council off of the action that you all took last month to craft the legislation and work through council on the naming of both the North Nashville Center and the renaming of the Wego Central facility. Again, I don't know that Ed would say, might be stealing my thunder. There wasn't a whole lot of thunder and not much lightning. We did have our budget hearing, and it was it was pretty quick and pretty painless. We had a lot of good questions, but the questions weren't really what I would say called critical of the budget. It was just questions about service initiatives, what we're doing, when we're doing it. So it was good discussion with members of the Budget and Finance Committee, but I wouldn't call it headline generating material. As Trey alluded to, we continue to be very heavily involved with NDOT, the Mayor's Office, Metro Planning, on advancing a lot of the East Bank activities and potential design activities. That will likely move in a north to south progression because Oracle, as we speak, are in the process of designing their campus, including access and infrastructure improvements. In that light, I did get to participate in what I'll call a quick bus tour the other day with members of the Mayor's Office, NDOT, Metro Planning, with some senior officials from US DOT to look at a variety of the upcoming transportation projects. In addition to the East Bank stuff, we had the opportunity to go up and visit the North Nashville site. I will tell you, maybe I'm being a little bit subjective and a little bit proprietary in this. I think they were probably more jazzed up about the North Nashville project than anything, and seeing that opportunity up there. So we also looked at, in addition to the East Bank, the potential Sobro hub and some of the Murfreesboro Pike corridors. So I think it was a good visit. It's always good to get folks from DC, on the ground, looking at things and not just looking at the paper. So we appreciated that opportunity. Our staff continue to work with the consultant and a lot of the other stakeholders on the Connect Downtown Mobility Study. So we had a couple workshops this week, and that continues to evolve. That is, again, trying to fit 10 gallons of water into a 5-gallon jug. Had the opportunity this past month to meet with the new executive director with Walk Bike Nashville, a lady named Meredith Montgomery, who's new to Nashville, but certainly not new to pedestrian activities. Very excited about her knowledge and her energy, and they've been a terrific partner in the past, and we look forward to continuing that in the future. And then finally, I'll just close out with a couple of our RTA items. Our long in process 2-year program to rebuild all 4 locomotives on the WeGo Star is now complete, and all 4 of those locomotives have been accepted and in revenue service. And as I've mentioned in prior months, we're getting ready to accept proposal on our WeGo Star future visioning study, which should have implications for a lot of the things, Janet, you were talking about earlier. Where does that commuter market go? How do we most effectively utilize our regional transit network? And I think even though it's technically an RTA study, a lot of the information we generate will be very helpful as we kind of plan the system moving forward. But unless there are any questions, Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Steve. Got done sort of quick there. That's good.
The East Bank consumes a lot of time through the course of a month, but we can sum it up in a few sentences.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I don't have long of a report. I just want to echo your sentiments about the governance workshop. And I want to thank everybody for coming as well. I thought it was very productive. I thought we had a good chance to have really good conversation about how we want to govern. And I think that that's critically important. Today's reports were somewhat daunting in a way. It's a reminder of the times that we're living in right now. And I think all of us got something, right? We all are struggling to get through your budget. You're trying to get through how you fix the same sinkhole. At the same time, try to figure out how we get people back on the buses, how we get routes going, and how we stay healthy and how we stay safe. Our hearts are all heavy right now. It's just a hard time for us. I think it's really important that we all respect one another, that we all care for one another, and that we treat each other with kindness, and that we have patience and we have grace with one another. It's critically important that we bring that grace in here, because I don't think it matters whether or not you're a board member, whether or not you're staff, senior administration, or you're the community. We're all in this to make certain that we make transit in Nashville safe and inclusive for all. And it's all our responsibility to do that. There are enough other people out here trying to make it hard, but we have to make it a little bit better. And I think it's all of our responsibilities to bring that respect in this room every month, and in everything that we do. And I am grateful that we do that. We do it collectively, and we do it in a way to make certain that we continue to move transit in Nashville. I'm proud to be a part of this board and to be a part of this organization, and I'm grateful to be a part of the Nashville community. So with that, we're gonna go this weekend. We got graduations, we got other celebrations. We're gonna take care of our families, we're gonna take care of each other, and we're gonna continue to do what we do every day, is take care of the people of Nashville and safely move them from one place to another. Thank you all. Happy Memorial Day weekend, and glad you two are back healthy, which is good. And to all of you, thank you. And with that, I think we're adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.